Hey, welcome, guys. Today we will be talking about, we've got a quick update on the real estate here with Josh Stetner. He's been a real estate agent for many, many years in Kelowna, and there's three major things that are happening in the real estate today, and that is number one, the Airbnb changes, number two, the higher density zoning, and number three is this big lawsuit that is hanging above the National Association of Real Estate Agents. So um, I wanted to start with the Airbnb because I think that's going to impact a lot of the people in the Okanagan. And what is your take, Josh, on all these changes?
From the provincial government, they're going to be legislating that for you to use or do short-term rentals in populous areas, that you will be required to have it as your principal residence. And this is something that they rolled out in New York
Hmm.
to a lot of owners having issues with now renting out their properties and having to actually in New York, you have to be physically present during their stays as well. In BC, they're just making it that it has to be your principal residence, but this affects a lot of people, especially in the Okanagan, who
Hmm.
have properties that they're using for short-term rentals, and they bought those properties under the assumption that they would be allowed to do those short-term rentals. And there's places like Discovery Bay, Sunset Waterfront Resort, Playa del Sol, if you bought an Aqua,
Hmm.
and many others in Kelowna and in even in West Kelowna as well. So
Right.
the legislation though has been a blanket legislation, and they haven't fully rolled out how exactly it's all going to look quite yet.
As
But
they always do, right? Like this seems like they always say, "Hey, this is what we're doing," and we're like, "Okay, how are we gonna do it?" We're like, "We don't know yet. We'll let you know once we figure it out."
right,
And so this is the same case, right? It was with the limited dual agency and many other examples we've had recently, early this year with the, changes in the age restrictions and tenancies and all of it, right? So if we
things.
can recap that, right? So in January they announced that there will be only 55 plus, no other age restrictions, just to add more inventory for the rental market. Then they said that the stratas that would be restricting rental options to rent, that they can't do that, right? So all of them became basically available for tenants,
Hmm.
and that you can rent it out, which was positive for some of them. But obviously, people like to maybe pay premium for the ones where they had more quiet and that would be only owner occupied
Right,
rather than having tenants in there. And now this is almost like a second wave of steps to add more inventory and help the rental market.
right,
And
yeah,
to me, it's like, okay, so now we're increasing the density on the zoning, so you can build higher density and you can maybe tear down some of those old houses, and instead of one house, you can now have four or up to six, is my understanding.
hmm,
And then Airbnb was another hit where they said, okay, well, just gonna cancel these guys, and then like, what would be the reason for it? Because I think that, kind of helped. We had very low vacancy rates here, right? Every summer, everything is booked up and it's very expensive. So I thought it was a good option for people that, wanted to spend here maybe a couple of weeks. And it was fairly affordable, right? You had more competition, not just the hotels, because we didn't have any, I think, to accommodate for all of it. And now if they're going to basically take off the market all these, as you've mentioned, some of those Discovery Bay and Sunset Waterfront Resort and many others, obviously that's going to make a big impact, I think, in what is going to be available, and maybe less people will come because it's going to be unaffordable, or it will be impossible to find a place to stay.
oh, definitely. But every action has a reaction, and there's two sides to this coin. And for a lot of people who can't get into the market or haven't been able to get into the market, especially with the higher interest rates, this comes as a feeling where they may have a chance to purchase something. But when you look at the flip side of it, you have many people who have invested their retirement potentially
Mm-hmm.
in purchasing these properties that were able to do short-term rentals, And it's not easy. Doing short-term rentals isn't just an easy money maker all the time, especially
Mm-hmm.
when we have fires in the Okanagan that could
Oh yeah.
prohibit that. And so you have to look at it from both sides. And I don't choose a side, because I can see how both parties could feel impact from this legislation. I do wish they would have had more of a consultation with cities and owners to see what these ramifications were going to be, instead of a kind of a blanket legislation and then trying to uh, filter how this is all going to look between now and May of next year, and May of
Yeah, but I think that
2024.
there's some ongoing, I guess, communication with the municipal governments and the provincial or federal government, just to figure out how they can make that work.
Hmm.
Because I don't think that they've were very clear on some of those issues that we were just talking about, right? Like which one is a resort, or is there going to be any
Right.
exemptions for some of the locations or developments? They were literally kind of run as a resort already, right?
Right. If you had purchased a property based off of, the zoning was allowing for short-term
Mm-hmm.
rentals, for it to just change suddenly, didn't give doesn't give people a chance to adjust appropriately. What it could end up happening is we could end up seeing a bunch of
Mm-hmm.
short-term rental condos hit the market, which again would be good for those who are looking to get into the market, not for
But the
those
ones that, yeah,
who
bought based on the income that they can get or generate from Airbnb, now they will be obviously not able to maybe even pay for their expenses, right? Because I know
right.
that a lot of them, you kind of had to almost run the 6 months as an Airbnb to be able to pay for all the expenses. And
Not only that,
since
you purchase that property at a higher price
yeah,
per square foot, typically because of the revenue potential that it allows
yeah.
for you.
And now that's so yeah, that'll be interesting to see how many of those will come out, because your options are basically to switch it to a long-term tenancies, which, as we've talked about, it might not cover your expenses, right? So it might
Hmm.
not be a point for you to keeping it. So you might decide to sell. And if there would be many of those, then people would, I guess, compete. Now sellers would, more inventory, less buyers, and some of them might be very motivated, so there might be some really good opportunities for people that were waiting and trying to get into the market.
Hmm. Yeah. So
So
there's always two sides to any legislation that comes out when they do these types of things. The other impact is the impact on tourism as well.
yeah, yeah, 100%. So that, and I was reading through the new updates, and basically the fines will be pretty substantial, so they're increasing that. And also they basically are putting in place, I guess, a government body that will be overlooking and communicating with these platforms like Airbnb, and they will be basically seeing if, if you're putting your listing up there, you have to have everything in place. You have to have your primary, you get a number that
Hmm.
will then be checked with the government body to make sure everything is in place, and that, if it's not, they'll report you, right? So there's
Right.
not going to be much way around it unless people find something that they can do to avoid all these things. But it seems like it's going to be pretty tight for you to make it work.
And just speaking to some other investors, they had asked if I rent out my unit for 30 days, maybe I rent it out for all of May for 30 days, then all of June for 30 days, and then all of July for 30 days, and all of August for 30 days, and try and make some revenue back that way. The government is now changing as well. They want to change the legislation to be 30, because right now anything over 30 days is considered a
Hmm.
long-term rental, but they would
Yeah.
change that to be 90 days. So anything
Yes.
less than 90 days would be considered a short-term rental. So you would have to rent your property out for a minimum of 90 days to avoid being considered a short-term rental.
Well, Josh, can you rent it out for 90 days to three different people? Anyway, so
Trying to
other
find the
things.
loophole, Michael.
Well, you got to be creative with the government legislations and everything. But um, all joking aside, now let's move on to the rezoning because I think there could be some really good opportunities out there, and like I think that this also what I am seeing, this is very interesting, right? Because we've obviously this year saw a lot of changes to help and get more inventory on the market for tenants and make it more affordable. And on the other side, we're taking a huge amount of people into the country, which is putting more pressure on the residential real estate market, right? So
Mm-hmm.
we're taking about 500,000 people into Canada every year now, and about 150,000 people is coming to BC.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand this because on one hand, we're, doing everything to support and help people to be able to find a place that is more affordable. But yet, on the other hand, we are making it much more difficult by taking all these people in that will obviously have to stay somewhere and rent or buy a property. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So what's your take on this?
Well, again, the legislation is to allow for 4 to 6 dwellings on a single family zoned property, which makes sense to some degree. I think some of the issues will stem from being able to get the utilities needed. So whether that's sewer, water, gas, those types of things, there also is a cost to that as well. You can't just add a whole bunch of people to the network or a bunch of properties to the network without upgrading those types of things. And I know there's some municipalities that are going to be struggling with that because they can't prevent someone in the future from putting up a fourplex, but the person that's building the fourplex may have to pay for the utilities to
Yeah.
get to
And
the
I think my understanding was also that the government will be providing some money for the
Mhm.
upgrade on the infrastructure,
Right.
and it's in the terms of billions of dollars, and also to help the municipalities to rezone and make it easier for people to understand. And I think it's going to be related, or it's based on the bus or like basically
Yeah,
um
the high transit routes,
yes,
the
so
4 lane
those will
roads. Yeah.
those will allow up to 6 units. So obviously they want us to have higher density. And I interesting, opinion that I saw is that, is housing going to be more available because it's supply and demand. And I think with the situation we have, we're creating a lot more supplies, but on the other hand, it's being fulfilled and filled up with these people that are coming in, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Mhm.
moving forward, do you think that the prices will maybe adjust, or what's your take on, like, because a lot of people are, I'm seeing that they're kind of hesitant to do anything because they're thinking that the prices will come down
Right.
because of, people start losing houses and the mortgage renewals are coming up and they'll affect some people. What are you seeing out there? What's the opinion of from your buyers and
Well, first of all, let me pull up my crystal ball and I'll tell you exactly what's going to happen. Um, so the like you mentioned, supply and demand, right? It's the toilet paper effect during COVID, uh, when
Mhm.
when everybody wanted toilet paper and they
For
couldn't make
whatever
it.
reason?
Yeah, they couldn't, but it was just the one thing that they everyone cling to. So no pun intended. They couldn't keep up with the demand for it. The
Yeah.
demand has waned quite a bit actually with housing market recently, and part of that is due to the increase in interest rates,
Mm-hmm.
and then the increase in supply because there's many owners who had their mortgage and their monthly payments increase by an exponential amount.
Right.
So if you're in a variable mortgage, you're probably already feeling that, especially if you hadn't locked in. And if you're on a fixed rate mortgage, you haven't felt it yet. So it's kind of like a slow car crash in that sense, because as long as interest rates remain where they are, hovering around the 5% mark, and mortgages come due, it's going to put people in a position where they may have to consider selling their property,
Yes, and I
especially if
think that
it's an investment property.
yeah, the numbers are, which is interesting. I think about 40% of mortgages has been renewed to, I guess, the new or locked into a new interest rate. and there's about 60% remaining, and that should be renewing in the next 2 years. So
Hmm.
as you said, we've been doing some calculations, and I got a video on that as well. When you're seeing the breakdown of what it looks like when you had 2% interest rate, and when it goes to 6, I mean it's a substantial difference in your payments, and a lot of people will not have that ability to cover that difference, right? And when it comes down to rentals, and I think that this is very important, right? Because the tenant doesn't have to pay you more because your mortgage payments are much higher when you're renewing to a new interest rate, a new mortgage. So there will be definitely some people that bought an investment property when everything was very crazy, and they got one and
Hmm.
a half 2% interest rates, and they rent it out, because that was always the case, right? You would buy that kind of property, you have two tenants, and they would cover your expenses. It kind of
Right.
worked out. But now with the change, when you got in at a high price and low interest rates, you'll be renewing, it'll be much different, right? Because now the prices came down. So
Hmm.
you wouldn't be paying as much, but now it'll cost you more on the borrowing. So some people will have the option to maybe extend the amortization, or they'll have to figure out what's the best way to move forward to make those payments.
Definitely. And I think one thing we have to though caution though is that I personally, and maybe you're of a different belief, but I personally don't believe that the prices are going to fall dramatically. I think there's a bit of a correction, and I think
Well,
we've
I
already
think we've
started to
already
see that
seen it,
correction.
right? We've
Yeah.
already seen it. It's 15,
Yes,
20%
exactly.
that we've seen. So I think we've
Yeah.
already adjusted for that. And
Yeah.
for the last year, we've been pretty steady. And, at the fall, yes, it's coming down a little bit, but I think that we'll see sort of a slow decline all the way to January, as we did last year, as
Hmm.
long as they're going to keep the interest rates the same. And then in the spring, it'll go, higher, most likely,
Right.
especially if they will start, coming down, which is kind of the forecast, that maybe in April they'll start reducing the interest rates. And I think that'll just going to cause the same thing as it did this year. And it'll be a lot more activity, and prices will come up again, right? So we
Yeah.
saw the lowest point was this year in January,
Hmm.
when the
Hmm.
average selling price was around $950,000. And then it jumped up to about 1.1 million, which is stayed throughout the whole year.
No, exactly. And so that's one thing that there's still buyers on the sidelines, kind of thinking that the market's going to somehow correct to pre-COVID, or
Yeah, well, we don't
and
know.
it's
We don't
just
have the
we don't know.
crystal ball. But
There,
here's my thing.
if war happens, or if there's something major
Yeah,
that happens, I mean,
yeah.
of course anything can happen, but it's not something I don't think that people should necessarily rely on.
Count on. Yes, 100%. And this is what I've noticed, but a lot of the guys out there saying, well, we want to wait for the interest rates to come down. And my answer is that, well, how is that going to be a better? I mean, it costs you maybe a little bit less on your payments or whatever, but what was happening during the low interest rates time? Like, it was absolutely nuts. It wasn't any easier to buy a property, or cheaper, because the prices were really high,
Well,
right?
you're
So
bidding, and often
you
in
were,
many
yeah, you were
cases.
going in with no subjects. It was a subject-free offer. And I literally had guys that were paying $230,000 over asking just to get in with no conditions.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so they didn't have an inspection, they didn't have even the financing in there, um, insurance, all that kind of stuff. They're just going in full on because they lost on, 4 or 5 houses before, where they
Hmm.
were bidding, 50, 70, 100,000 over asking, and it just didn't work out. It was not easier to buy a house when the interest rates were low. You were
Yeah.
paying in a different way.
One rule of thumb that my dad and I say is that over a 10-year span, you're going to be okay. If you're looking to
Yep.
purchase
So
something to flip
it's
it
a
in a
long
year, well,
term.
then
Yeah.
that's different, and you might be more hesitant. But if it's something a home you're planning to live in or hold on to for a number of years,
Yep.
you're probably you're going to be fine.
Yeah.
And when we've seen people who don't purchase and then wish they would have later, and kind of miss the boat, so to speak. Especially
Yes,
when,
and that's the point, right? If you would go back, what was if you would just look at the last sort of a peak before there was the housing bubble and the crash in 2008, if you would buy just before or at the peak at the time, what was the average selling price? It was about $550,000. And we've doubled that since then, right? So
Yeah,
to me, it's as you said, if you're thinking of a long-term investment as a place where you will be living, then obviously it might be a little bit more difficult to get, pre-approved and get in. However, it's not going to be any easier when the interest rates will be low because you'll be competing with all these other buyers who will be coming out.
yeah,
And then you just never know when the bottom is. So you can't really time it, right? And you're
right.
better off just to buy and hold on to it than try to time it, I think.
That's sound advice, Michael. Sound
Yeah.
advice.
As we've said, we don't really have a crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen, but from what we are seeing, we are sort of stabilized with the inventory. We are the demand and everything is now to a normal year. It's not as crazy as it used to be, and I think that there's going to be growing population, and we're not building. That's the other thing is we are not building enough houses to supply the demand that will be coming. And I think if they're going to start reducing the interest rates, it'll go crazy again, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
No, absolutely.
we
Yeah,
got a
and
thumbs up there.
yeah. Did I thumb up?
Yeah,
Did
I
you give
don't
me a thumbs
know.
up?
No, it
There we
just
go.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you're right, Michael. You're right. Thumbs
So
up. Yeah. Hmm.
we'll just wrap it up with this lawsuit. What's your obviously a lot of there's a lot of speculation on what's going to be happening with this. I'm not sure if you're paying attention to it, but obviously,
Not, yeah, if I'm honest, I don't know enough about it to have a solid opinion on it. I've read some articles about what's going on in because it's in the States, in the
yep.
United States, and with the commissions. So maybe perhaps if you want to just share with the
Yeah,
viewers
so
what
so
exactly the
so
issue is.
here's what is I was reading through the lawsuit, and it's a quite a read, but essentially the Department of Justice in the US decided that the real estate agents are conspiring and inflating the prices by offering a commission to the buyer's agent. That's what it is, right? So
Right.
um in how it works is that when you list a property, Josh, but when you list a property, there is a half commission that goes to the listing agent, half that goes to the buyer's agent, right? So we're
Hmm.
basically offering half of the commission to anyone else out there. So in Kelowna, it would be 1,000 or 1,200 agents that if they have a buyer, they'll be motivated to bring you the buyer to show the property because they get compensation for it, right?
Right.
And the real reason for that, I guess, is that you can, as a buyer, finance and you don't have to pay it out of your pocket. But their point of view is that the seller now is paying commission to the buyer's agents that they didn't hire, they didn't work with him, they're not acting in their best interest. So why the hell they should be paying them a commission?
Right. Yeah. So essentially, why is the seller paying a commission to the buyer's agent to negotiate
When
a
yeah,
price down?
exactly, right? So because they're working for their goal is to get their best price for the buyer, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And they're not acting for the best interest of the sellers. But I think that it's obviously challenging the status quo and how it's been done for many, many years. And what it will come out of it, we'll see. But I don't see that buyers will be, coming to us as buyer's agent and be willing to pay that kind of commission because now it would be coming out of their pockets.
Well, I think one of the issues too is that you in BC specifically, dual agency is banned. So
Exactly. So you
how
would be
would
like
you, as a
you would
buyer,
list a you would list the house and then you couldn't do anything because you can't represent the buyers or give them any advice. So we would definitely have our hands tied down, right? Like it's a
yeah,
very interesting. I'm not sure if it's gonna get here